good, Native Brew, baby? What is up, YouTube? It's your boy, Millsy, back at Hometown Commander, back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I brew my version 1.0 deck as the commander in front of us in my quest to brew the magic world. You know the motto, baby. It's ABB, always be brewing, and that's what we're back to do today. The deck list is going to be down in the description for you below, as well as I'd really appreciate if you could interact with the video, like, comment, subscribe, consider checking out the links in the description. I'd appreciate it. But today, we're continuing Aether Drift, and you know, when vehicles get enough support in one set, it means we got to pull out all the stops for all the vehicle commanders. And today, we're taking a look at Greasefang, Okiba Boss, a 3-mana Orzhov 4/3 rat pilot. Since beginning of combat on our turn, we can bring a vehicle from our graveyard back to the battlefield. It gets haste and return it to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. This is a really interesting ability. I think Greasefang's fun because it finds a way to pair white, which I feel like becomes a pretty popular vehicle color, right, in a lot of the support it has, with black in a way to make your graveyard matter, which is what I think black's one of Big's black strengths has always been. You see it in a lot of popular black commander decks, and here it makes it really important because we do have a lot of ways that we can discard. There's different ways that we can feed our graveyard, which is something that I think Greasefang is going to try to leverage to get the right vehicles at the right time. But at the end of the day, I think it's a loop where we're going to try to get vehicles into our graveyard, reanimate them for the turn, right? Get them back to our hand, and then play them if possible. Otherwise, just keep feeding that yard, keep getting them back out. And the interesting thing about feeding the yard with Greasefang is that we actually are able to get some very powerful vehicles very early, if possible. Of course, what it's going to come down to is crewing our vehicles on that turn it comes in. As well as future turns. So that's kind of the key thing we need to do to get that game plan rolling. But we can't talk vehicles without having vehicles to get back. And my philosophy here on vehicles is there's going to be a lot of mid-range vehicles, right, in the sense of things that tap for value or do things when they attack that we need to kind of set our board and get our game plan going. And then there's the top-end vehicles, that we really want to get. They're going to mean big damage. So for example, Errol's Surveyor, Cultivator's Caravan. These are vehicles that are doing a role for us. Caravan tapping for mana. Surveyor potentially going to get us more lands. These aren't the ones that we're trying to seed into the graveyard and get back every turn and get big damage in or big life swings. But they're the ones that are going to help us get up to those big vehicles so we can do that. For example, something like Brotherhood Vertibird, which is going to grow for the number of artifacts we control. So the bigger our board gets, the more of a threat Vertibird's going to be. An example of two vehicles that can do this for us: Cybership, a 6-mana 8/8 with crew 4 that whenever it deals combat damage to a player, we put the top 2 cards of that player's library on the battlefield face down on our controller, 2/2 Cybermen. Well, this is great, right? Because not only is it a huge threat in the air, but then it's actually going to take and make us crewers for future turns. The other good thing to remember when we're looking at our vehicles is we want to make sure we're choosing vehicles that Greasefang can help crew, since Greasefang doesn't have to attack in order to do it. So ideally, we want as big as vehicles as we can, right, that Greasefang can crew for us. Same thing with something like Demonic Junker. When it comes in, for each player, we destroy up to 1 creature that player controls. If a creature we control is destroyed, we put 2 counters on Demonic Junker. What I kind of like about this is you're getting up potentially 3 for 1. Maybe we set a token aside, or we don't have to, right, destroy our own, because the truth is the Junker could just end up coming back to our hand. But the nice part is it could be pretty well easily played out of our hand as well if it gets stuck in our hand, because it has infinity for artifacts, potentially bring it down to just 2 or 3 mana. Dreadmobile may look odd. It's an uncommon vehicle. It has Menace, Crew 1. It's a 3/3, but it has a huge ability for the purposes of Greasefang's ability. And that is, 1, sacrifice an artifact or creature, put a counter on Dreadmobile. Well, you remember that Greasefang's ability puts it back at the beginning of the next end step. So what Dreadmobile can do is actually sack that vehicle that we just brought back in with Greasefang to keep it in the graveyard. That way it's not going to bounce back to our hand, and we're growing Dreadmobile over the process. You're going to notice the deck's going to try to play these sack outlets, again, to keep the key vehicles right in the graveyard so we can keep getting them back. Foreboding Steamboat's a 5-mana 5-set that says whenever it comes in, each player chooses 2 non-token, non-vehicle creatures they control, and we exile them until Foreboding Steamboat leaves the battlefield. So we do need to be a little bit careful with the Steamboat in the sense that we want to make sure we have some fodder for it. And then whenever it attacks, putting a card exiled with it into its owner's graveyard if you do investigate. Now, this is interesting with Greasefang, right? Because this is just going to end up coming back to our hand, meaning they're going to come back. So I think the Steamboat ideally wants to hit things like tokens that aren't going to come back. But the nice part is you could still hit some creatures and then put them into their graveyards so they don't come back. Although I think the Steamboat is something that at least we still need to pay attention to in the moment. It's not going to be as free as some of our other vehicles we have access to. Mech Titan Core, our beloved Megazord, we can pay 5 and exile it and 4 other artifact creatures or vehicles to make a big 10/10 token with a bunch of abilities. And then when that token leaves the battlefield, we get everything that we used except the core back to the battlefield in tap. So an interesting way to take advantage of some more vehicles to make a big threatening token to deal the damage to our opponents. I've always liked Nautiloid Ship. When it comes in, you get to exile somebody's graveyard, and then whenever it hits a player, you can put a creature card with exile with Nautiloid Ship, onto the battlefield under your control. This is really interesting with Greasefang, right? Because Nautiloid Ship is actually going to, from the way I read this, it would exile graveyards every time it comes in, and then it would actually still be able to see the cards exiled with its previous iterations because it says exiled with Nautiloid Ship. At least that's the way I read the ruling. You can let me know in the comments if I'm incorrect on that, but it could be a good way to keep that pile growing and still exiling things out of your opponent's graveyard. Necron Monolith seems like a fun one. Whenever it attacks, we mill 3 and we make a 2/2 Necron Warrior token for each creature milled this way. So a good way to make some more crewers, right, as we're attacking with these. Parhelion makes 2/4/4 Angels whenever it attacks, so a great one we want to keep getting back if possible. Especially since those 4/4 Angels can either crew just about every vehicle in our deck or can be great threats on their own. Peace Walker Colossus isn't bad to pair up with Greasefang, as it can turn any vehicle into a creature for the turn. So it pairs really well, right? Greasefang brings it back. Colossus makes it 1 to end a turn, and it has crew 4 as well. Salvation Engine, I think, works really well with Greasefang. And I think when I read Salvation Engine, it was one of those ones that I was the most excited to put in Greasefang, because whenever it attacks, you return up to 1 artifact from your graveyard to the battlefield. So you kind of get to get around Greasefang's ability, and hopefully, right, if you think about it, if you have Salvation Engine and multiple vehicles in your graveyard, you bring Salvation Engine back with Greasefang, you attack with it, right? You bring another one back, it bounces itself to hand. Now you're getting potentially multiple per turn, right? And of course, one that you don't have to bounce as well. So you can see the kind of interactions there. Thunderhawk Gunship, whenever it attacks, puts all your vehicles in the air. Just an important, all your creatures in the air. It could be really important as we're having a mix of vehicles and smaller creatures. Maybe that flying could be the reason we, get in for a big attack. Unlicensed Hearse is probably one of the ones where we don't really want to bounce it with Greasefang. We really want to get it to always be down every turn, tapping it to grow its power and toughness as we exile cards from a graveyard. And then it can just become a real threat to our opponents, since a lot of the tokens we're making are going to be able to crew that Hearse. Valor Flagship is probably one of the most interesting vehicles in the deck, because we can cycle it, meaning we can discard it to get it into the graveyard to draw a card. And when we cycle it, we get a bunch of pilot tokens that can crew. This is almost, I think, near perfect for what Greasefang wants to do, because Valor's Flagship will bounce itself back into our hand. And if we maybe plan our turns that we don't play anything else, we can just cycle it, make a couple pilots, and then it's their next turn for Greasefang to be able to reanimate. And Valor Flagship's a big 7/7, right, first strike lifelinker. So it's probably one of our favorite vehicles for that. And then the Weatherlight, whenever it hits, is just going to allow us to get a historic card off the top 5 and put it into our hand. The Weatherlight's an interesting one. I mean, it is a flyer. It does have a pretty low crew cost. But again, it may be one that may be good in the early game if it's the only vehicle we see, just to start digging through our deck and getting access to some things. But I think it's easy in any vehicle deck to care about artifacts as well, because, well, all vehicles are artifacts. So you have things like Digsite Engineer that can make you constructs every time you cast an artifact spell. They can be great crewers in the early game. In the mid to late game, they're their own threats, getting huge. Imatech's whole precon in 40k was about artifacts leaving our graveyard, and that's all Greasefang wants to do. So I feel like Imatech's could have fit along really well. Whenever one of our artifact cards leave our graveyard, we make 2 2/2 Necron Warrior creature tokens. So again, great way to start crewing our vehicles with them. And then at the start of combat on our turn, we can have another creature get +2/+2 and menace. We're not going to be able to target the thing that Greasefang brings in with this, but that's a-okay because I'm sure we'll have plenty of other targets that Imhotep can make a real threat. Lead at the end of our end step's going to untap each other artifact creature we control, and then she can tap to make a vehicle token. Again, the goal with the crewers in this deck is to make as many of them as artifacts as possible so that things that untap our artifacts, right, can untap those crewers as well. So we can crew defensively, right, on our opponent's turns. Lucille's going to protect our attacking artifact creatures, which is great. And then whenever one or more artifacts come in our control, we draw a card. So hopefully every turn we're drawing, right, with that off of Greasefang. And then Rebek is just an interesting card, and I'm intrigued to see how this would do in an average game. So artifacts you control have protection from each mana value among artifacts you control. So this is potentially huge, right? If you think about it, if you get something like a Soul Ring, a Talisman, or a Signet, and a Commander Sphere down, you're protected from most single target removal for things like Greasefang. Yes, sorry, Greasefang wouldn't be an artifact, but for any of your other key things, you can kind of make this pile of mana values to protect your things from key removal, right, as you build your board and get the party started, which I think is important when it comes to kind of insulating our deck. But I think the biggest thing that Greasefang wants to do, and the reason we hope to get it faster, right? We hope to kind of get above our means is trying to seed our vehicles into the graveyard so that we can reanimate them. And there's with a Greasefang's ability. And there's a way to do this. Like Cynical Loner and Oracle Lore Mage are both going to allow us to get any card we want to and get it into our graveyard. This is really important because we can go get the key vehicle we want and get it in our graveyard, right? Both of them have a great crew cost at 3. Pack Rat is power and toughness equal to the number of rats we control. We can pay 3 and discard a card to make a pack rat. Well, this is huge because we can pitch the vehicle we just got back that turn, right? The one that we just got back to our hand after it bounced after combat. Make another pack rat. Hopefully they either grow to be huge threats or great crews for us, right? And then it's back in the graveyard, right, for the next turn that we can use it for Greasefang's ability. Same thing with Valen Tumor. When it comes in, we get to just do it once, search for something, put it in the graveyard. So again, not bad, and it's a 2 cost, which isn't as good as 3 or 4 for our crewers, but it is a Death Touch blocker, which can be relevant. Lively Dirge will let us search your library for a card and put it in our graveyard for 3 mana. Again, great ability. Go get the key vehicle, dump it in the yard for Greasefang. Morbid Curiosity says we can sacrifice an artifact or creature and draw cards equal to its mana value. This is, again, great because we can sack that vehicle that we brought back, draw cards, and then it's in the graveyard right for next turn where we can use it with Greasefang again. Unmarked Grave and Entomb, both just going to go get something and dump it in the graveyard. Unmarked Grave does say that it has to be non-legendary, but that's fine. Most of our vehicles are non-legendary, so it's not that big of a deal. But again, go get the thing we want, dump it in the graveyard. Key to the City lets us pitch a card to make something unblockable. Again, very useful because we could, on an opponent's turn, tap the key to dump the thing that just got bounced back to our hand on our last turn into the graveyard for next turn, right? We, of course, want to use Key to the City if possible to make something unblockable. We don't have to, right? Because in the grand scheme of things, as long as we're reseeding those vehicles back in our graveyard, I think that's what Greasefang wants to do. And so that's kind of more of the search and the discard. And then you have just straight mill, right? With something like Ripples of Undeath, just milling 3 at the start of our main phase, and we can pay 1 and 3 life, and if we do, we put a card from among them back into our hand, right? If we mill a key piece of removal or a land we really need, we can get it back. Otherwise, we're just feeding our graveyard. Matzalantley kind of does the similar thing to what we were doing with the other ones, just allowing to draw and then pitch, and then we can transform it if we have Delirium into a land that adds X mana of any one color, where X is the number of permanents in our graveyard. So it can kind of value both sides for us dumping things into our graveyard, especially things that aren't vehicles, right? Or, our enchantments, our creatures, our lands, our other things. So it kind of helps pay off if we're on the mill plan, if we're milling ourselves, right? We don't have to worry about milling too many things because we have other ways to take advantage of them. We have things like Fanatical Offering and Deadly Dispute that are going to allow you to sack an artifact to draw 2. This is important because then you can sack that vehicle, right, that you brought back, get it back in the graveyard to reanimate, right, on the next turn. and then you make a map token for the Fnatic offering. Strider Resonator will be able to copy Greasefang's ability. Pretty nice. 2 mana each turn to do that. Same thing with Tarian's Journal, being able to sack that artifact that we brought back to draw a card, keep it in the graveyard, right? And take advantage of it that way. I just realized that was the cards to consider section. That's on me. So remember, the goal of the cards to consider section is to look into more things as we're testing. So Deadly Dispute's in the deck, Fanatical Offering is not. And I think that's important for the purposes of testing, is to see, do we need more of these things that sacrifice artifacts? I think I've got a good number of them. Maybe we realize in testing that we need more of them. And then Serenic Resonator, mainly I just wanted to see, are there enough opportunities where we have the spare mana to resonate and have enough crewers every turn? And if so, maybe we look into the resonators of the world to see if doubling up or doing that on Greasefang's triggers work. At the end of the day, I think testing comes down to how often can we get our vehicles in the graveyard, and how often can we protect Greasefang to, get those reanimates and those big attacks off. But let's do what we love to do the most on the channel. Let's get into our playtest. Remember, the goal of playtest is not to find magical Christmas land. It's not to determine the best plays our deck has. It's to walk through our first few turns, understand our deck, and get a hold of what our game plans look like. Here we're keeping a 4-lander with Dispatch, Unmarked Grave, and a Collector's Vault. So we have at least one way to seed something into our graveyard, and then the Collector's Vault can draw and discard as well. So turn 1, we see Okiba Reckoner Raid. So on the first 2, each opponent loses 1 and we gain 1. And then on the third one, we get to flip it over and come back as a creature that gives all of our vehicles a menace. So that's actually not a bad turn 1 play, right? Just to get that process started for our opponents. Turn 2, we see King Makar. So it says, whenever it becomes untapped, you may exile target creature. If you do, put a colorless artifact token named Gold onto the battlefield. It has sacrificed this artifact. So you'll notice that it doesn't say our creature, it just says anyone's creature. So Makar is kind of a fun idea for some removal, plus, it's could potentially crew for us. Here I'm thinking we just unmark Grave, try to seed something into the graveyard. I'm trying to think of what's the best idea for us this early in the game. My thought is something that when it comes back is going to make things that can potentially crew it. Maybe something like something like Rolling Hamsphere, or something like Thunderhawk Gunship, just something that's going to come in and do something. But remember, we need to get something that can get crewed the turn it comes in. So, right, Hamsphere can actually be crewed by Greasefang. And Hamsphere is an interesting one because it grows with the number of hamsters you have. The only problem is, right, we don't have, well, I guess we have the Collector's Vault, so we have a way to get it back into the graveyard. So let's try that. Let's try the Hamsphere just for the purposes of this one. This has gone up to 2. So now as we come back to our turn, the Okiba Raid is going to flip over. So now all our vehicles have Menace. Right. We can play Greasefang, bring a Hamsphere back, and then we can crew it with Greasefang. And then whenever it attacks, right, we get 3 hamsters. My thought here on the hamsters specifically is then they can stick around for, if Hamsphere comes back. So now it's a 7/7 with Menace. Might be a nice attack on someone here on turn 3. And then remember, it pops back to our hand, which is okay. It's going to take us a little bit to get up there mana-wise if that's what we want to do. But the nice part is, hopefully, right, now we can pay 2 for the vault, draw a card, put Hamsphere into our graveyard with it, right, and make a token, a treasure token, right? And now it's in our graveyard ready to go. I think this is where our discard outlets can be so useful for us, because now, same thing, come back, crew it with crew it with Greasefang. 3 more hamsters. Now it's a 10/10 with Menace because of the Nezumi Road Captain. Take the attack, bounce back to our hand, and now we have this loop for 2 mana for every turn to just seed any vehicle we want from our hand into our graveyard to have this party started if we need to, right? This is probably the turn to get this Basilica down. So 4 mana. I mean, I want to leave up mana for something like Dispatch, right? Dispatch, we should be... Well, no, we can't right now. We only have 2. I guess we have 3. We have 3 artifacts. So we should be able to pay for that Dispatch. We also could leave up something like Anguish and make it, but we need to get, right, this into the graveyard. So pay 2 to draw, pitch the Hamsphere, make a treasure. So now we're good on treasures. If we keep the treasures there, we should have enough mana for the Dispatch as some removal, right? Hamsphere back, a couple other hamsters. Now the hamsters could be attacking if we want them to, but I think here they're just here to guarantee that Hamsphere's attacking and doling out that damage, right, for the amount of hamsters we have to any target, right? Take out key blockers, take out key creatures our opponents have, or planeswalkers. There's a lot of things there. We'll stop here because I think we've kind of demonstrated what we want to do with this loop. But the truth is, we want to find a way to discard in a good vehicle, and then as long as Greasefang's out, right, we're really partying and keeping our game plan going. There, of course, we're dependent on our opponents not taking Hamsphere off the battlefield, which just is what it is. But I mean, that's going to be any game of Commander, right? Making sure you keep your Commander and your key pieces on the battlefield. Here we're keeping a 3-lander with Lita, Tempered Steel, Valor's Flagship, and the Steamboat. So we got a couple interesting vehicles. We just need a way to get them into the graveyard. Turn 1, we draw Ripples of Undeath. That's the one that can actually start milling us. I kind of like the idea of getting that down. So now as we come into our next turn, it's going to go off. We can mill 3. And remember, we can pay 1 and 3 life to get one of them back. So we get Matzalanti, Demonic Junker, and the Perdwin. Well, I really like those 2 vehicles, but I also really like Matzalanti. Being able to think things like Valor's Flagship, or the vehicles that get bounced back into our graveyard. But the problem is, if I pay this, I can't get Greasefang down this turn, and I can't do something like Demonic Junker this turn to get some removal of my opponents. So I think if this would come down to what does the board look like. If I guess I can't play Matzalanti either, so we're kind of in the same boat. I guess we haven't played our land this turn. Right, so the unfortunate part here is that if I bring Matzalanti back, I'm paying a land, and I'm playing SRAM this turn, probably. Whereas if I keep it there, I'm playing Greasefang, and I'm getting something, like Demonic Junker and getting some removal. So I guess there's the back and forth on which makes the most sense. I mean, to me, Matzalanti makes the most sense because then we have a way to feed Valor's Flagship and send these other ones in the Junker back into our graveyard. I feel like it's important. I kind of have to take the turn off to do it, but SRAM would then be there as a crewer, right, on a future turn. So we come to our next turn, mill 3, the Verge, Chariot, and a Plains. Again, we would ideally like a land here, and we can do it. We can pay 1 and get a land back, and we could still cast Greasefang, and then maybe we can get something else into our graveyard that way. So I think I would pay the 1 to get the Verge back, get it in, play Greasefang. Greasefang won't trigger SRAM, and then my thought is the Junker. Hit something of everybody's crew, or except ours, crew it with Greasefang and put it back in our hand. So now we definitely do need to get the Matzalanti down, but it's easier now, right? Because we have 4 mana and it's a little bit easier to do. So we'll come into our next turn here. Again, nothing in the graveyard. Dockside Chef is great. A way to sacrifice those vehicles, right? Put them back in our graveyard. Here I'm thinking Matzalanti. We'll void the mill this time on the Undeath, just because I'm thinking I can play the Dockside Chef. I can't use it this turn, but I can tap the Matzalanti to draw. Again, the goal there was to try to hit a land. And I think if there's still key things, we do the Junker. If not, I'm kind of thinking the Flagship. Well, Reaver Titan would be nice, right? Attacking and dealing 5 damage. So maybe it's the Reaver Titan. Bring the Reaver Titan back with Greasefang, crew it, 5 damage everybody, attack for that big 10, and then bounce it back to our hand, and we're at 8 here, which is fine, right? Because we want them to be in the graveyard, right? So that's okay that we're pitching the hand size because it's what we want. Here, man, we are still down on the lands, which is kind of stinky, but we'll draw with Matzalanti. There's another draw outlet in Collector's Vault. We'll pitch the Steamboat, I guess. Well, actually, I guess we want to pitch the Reaver Titan because that's our other good option for reanimating back out of the graveyard. Here, I'm thinking either Lita or hold up something like Mortify. I just like Lita because it's another crewer. But we also could keep the mana open for Dockside Chef to draw. Right, so we could do something like Collector's Vault. Get the Reaver Titan back, crew it, right, attack, and then sack it to the Dockside Chef to draw a card. Right now it doesn't bounce back to our hand, it's staying in the graveyard. And now, great, at the end of our turn, we pitch the Salvation Engine. Now the Salvation Engine's our target, right? Because then it can get vehicles back, sack it to the Dockside Chef, and now we're in this great loop where we're keeping that vehicle we're reanimating in our graveyard to always be coming back. The only downside is we don't have Matt Lazzanti going off quite yet. I can get a creature in my graveyard. I think it's just going to be getting the 4th type that's going to be a problem. I guess if I manage to get rid of the Dockside Chef somehow, we could flip over Matt Lazzanti. But I kind of like this loop of bring the vehicle in, attack, get some sort of benefit, sack it to the chef to draw, right? Put it back in the graveyard. Matt Lazzanti can keep getting more things in our graveyard to reanimate. Because if you think about it, if I bring let's say this turn, I can't tell what turn I was on, but we'll just go one more. Let's say I bring the engine back, right? That's the target, to bring the engine back. Well, right now I can bring Reaver Titan or the Junker back, right? So let's say I do that this turn, bring the Reaver Titan back, sack the engine to the chef, draw a card, whatever. Well, now, I want to keep seeding, right? I want to keep seeding those vehicles in my graveyard to keep reanimating with engine when it comes back. I think you can kind of see the benefit of that if we can get that loop set up. Let's get into our last playtest, keeping a 5-lander with Arcane Signet and Oracle Lore Mage. Again, good way to seed our graveyard, and a decent crewer in itself in a 3/3. So turn 1, ain't nothing, ain't nothing there too much for us. Turn 2, we'll get the Arcane Signet down. Then here on turn 3, it's not like we have anything to do with Greasefang just yet. So I think it's the Lore Mage here, just because then that way we can actually go ahead and play Greasefang, tap the Lore Mage to go put something in our graveyard. Now the bummer here is like half the vehicles we'd want are in our hand, right? Salvation Engine, Demonic Junker. So that is kind of unfortunate, but I think we also want to try to get something that can make crewers. The gunship's one of them. I guess what? Well, I've tapped Lore Mage to do this, so I can't go get something like Cybership 4. Maybe Cybership's the perfect one here. Get it, crew. It gives me 2 Cybermen tokens, right? This is my opponent's cards that I'm going to hit, right? Now I can start getting crews for other ones, right? And not just for the... Oh, sorry, it goes back to my hand. And then here, now we're at 6 mana. Now I can, get things in and crew them. Unfortunately, they're just not going to have haste. So the problem now is, how do I get things into my graveyard to come back? Well, we still have the Lore Mage. The Lore Mage can still tap, and I think we want it to, right? I'm just trying to figure out what at this point I think is my best vehicle option. And I like Flagship because it could cycle, right, and make a bunch of pilots and keep itself in our graveyard, which feels ideal because we're going to have to be hard casting some of these other vehicles. I really wish there was a vehicle that was like pitch a card, give it indestructible or something. I guess we'll get the Flagship. It's going to come back, crew it with, Greasefang and attack. And I think this turn, probably just play something like the Cybership. It's going to give us some bodies on the ground. And then, right, this comes back to our hand. There's Dreadmobile, right, to keep them in our graveyard. So not a bad play. It might have been like right a turn later when we would have wanted it. But I think it's still in a good shape. We could go Dreadmobile. I've got 3 mana left. I could cycle for 0 on the Flagship to draw a card. It just gets it into the graveyard. And then get the Flagship back. I can crew both it and the Cybership. The Cybership gets me 2 more. Sack this to the Dread. I have the mana, do I? Because I cycled it. Yeah, I don't have the mana this turn, but that's okay. We've got the Cyberman back, and I think we're still in good shape. We've got this loop started, right? So now this turn, again, we want to try to get it into our graveyard so we can get it back. I think we can just cycle for 0, right? Now I've got 4 mana. Remember, I want to try to keep there. Junker is 1, 2, 3. It's just 1 black, so we play it, right? Get it down. I don't think I can get any in the engine. I was trying to see if maybe I could get something like the engine down this turn, but I guess we'll just play the hearse. Again, get the flagship back, sack it this time to the Dreadmobile, just to keep it in the graveyard, right? Cyber ship makes me a couple more Cybermen, and now we're not in bad shape, right? We've got enough to control our vehicles. We're kind of getting this game plan started. I think a lot of this deck is going to come down to how do you get your game plan started? How do you get your board state started? So that you can kind of build this value of vehicles. Let me know, what do you think of Greasefang down in the comment section below, and I will catch you all in the next